small in comparison to what we're really grappling with now as we see what's coming economically down the pike. So I think if you can draw a line from sort of a darker place in trying to grapple with the American dream, which Zeitgeist had something to do with, 5 years later now, Oceania, I think, is a way to say, I'm just not going to live in that spirit, that energy, that dark energy. I've heard you talk about it, and certainly I've thought about it a lot, which is, we got to live, Some of the most inspirational stuff I've ever heard you talk about is when you just talk about nature, about how God's kingdom inspires you to fight the good fight and to, think of families and what life's really about. And I think that my album is really about that. It's like we all go through hard times. Our country's going through a hard time. It's not a political album in that sense, but at the same time, if the politics is part of the backdrop in the foreground, I just want to embrace my life and get right with God, get right with my spirit, because I think that's the way to lead us out of this kind of craziness that, again, seems to be coming, and God knows where it's coming from, but I mean, everywhere you go, people feel it, and they can't put their finger on it. You see signs where that's what's going on in Greece or Spain. We just had a show canceled, actually. We were supposed to play on an island called Tenerife. I think the island is called, or the city was called Tenerife, and the show was canceled because of the Spanish economic crisis. So these are starting to have real effects on and so when we look back at we see these things happening, we don't know where this is all going. You know what I mean? When you see mainstream news sources, the Foxes and the CNNs, using the kind of language that 5 years ago you were being condemned for, it's kind of laughable.
Profound, Mr. Corrigan. We see Larry Summers, one of the top bankster globalists, in the Washington Post last week saying, prepare for total collapse. But he's acting like it's all an accident and they're the wise old men that are going to save us, when they're the people on record that engineered this implosion. That's how we were able more than 10 years ago to chronicle what was coming. And now here we are, it's out in the open, and a lot of people say, well, you're being negative talking about all these horrible things. But if we don't focus and expose the bad, then we can never recognize it from the good and protect what's good. And I can feel the heartbeat of the universe, God, whatever people want to call it, and more people are actually coming out of their trance. I am seeing that, but I also see others who aren't waking up getting deeper into the trance.
I would totally agree with that. I think what's happening is we're seeing a split. The people that are invested in reality, and by reality I'm not talking about the Adam Sandler movie version, you know what I mean, or the sitcom version. I'm talking about reality as we know it, as our ancestors lived it. Like what the heck is going to happen to me and my family? How do we move forward? How do we progress as a species? How do we evolve rightly and morally? As we see that part of, and it's everywhere. It's not just America. You see glimpses in China and in India and Africa. As people are waking up, they're doing their own research. They're having their own discourse with their friends and family. And now they have access to information in a way they've never had. So empires can't sort of play this game that they've played, dating back probably longer than you and I could recall. The other side, of course, has to go deeper into the dream, like the Matrix. They have to go there because that's the only way to sustain the insanity. And here's this is a touchy subject, but this is the classic example. We've all had that situation where, like, something horrible happens. A kid falls down a hole, and when we're live from the kid that fell down the hole, and everybody's, will the kid get out of the hole safely? And their prayer vigils, and yes, that's an appropriate response. We should care. Yet, meanwhile, kids are dying everywhere. Is it from an unjust military action, or is it from a reckless police force or something? There's things that are happening everywhere that we don't have that same level of concern. But why don't we? Well, we've been socially conditioned that one thing is okay to care about, and one thing, well, just accept the official version and just kind of march on. And I think this is where people are waking up and saying, wait a second, there's a hypocrisy in that. Why don't we care about everybody equally? And you see that as the world citizenry is waking up, And so then it's not really about you or me anymore. It's about people taking their own individual journey to discover what they want from this world. And those that are waking up are going to find that information, and they're going to draw their own conclusions, and they're probably not going to necessarily agree with you or me or the next guy or Larry Summers. They're going to make their own conclusions, and that's what we want. We want a bunch of independent thinkers. We don't want sheep. That's the worst thing. But the sheep are going to become more sheep because that's what they want. They don't want to wake up. They want to live in that dream. And I know people like that in my family. They don't want to know. they just, and I'm sure you've had those conversations. Anybody listening to you, I'm sure has had those conversations. You talk to people and you talk about, I don't know, the Federal Reserve, something that's really not that political when you get right down to it, and they don't want to hear it. They just want to put their fingers in their ear and believe the TV show that's being presented politically.
Bang on from my perspective, Billy. That's what's happening. The wheat is being separated from the chaff, and people that are committed to the illusion, once they get into that trap, they'll go along with anything. And you've crystallized something that I've attempted to boil down, and that's that it's insulting that the power structure, the corporate-controlled media, the people that create the maps of the mind, they say, get upset about this child that they claim Assad killed in Syria, and then when hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children are killed, we're told, oh, they're just, dehumanized Arabs or Muslims. And it's insulting. It's insulting that the mainstream media and the corporate culture tries to flip our emotions on and off and tell us when we can care about something. I don't mean to go off into a rant, but what you said really is the key. It's recognizing how ridiculous and fake and plastic this culture is.
Yes, and so, like, for example, we just had the case with Sandusky, the Penn State, the horrible stories of molesting these young men. And as you've talked about, maybe a culture that would have protected him because of wanting to maintain power or not pay the price for looking the other way. Now, of course, you're going to have the cases that are going to come up with the administration officials that allegedly may have covered it up, and so on and so on and so on. The interesting thing is what I see with the people around me, and I'm not necessarily surrounded by a bunch of liberal class. I'm surrounded by a lot of working class people. I see them not necessarily buying these narratives like they used to. And so what happens, and we know this from rock and roll, if the audience doesn't react, you turn the volume up louder. Well, what we have is a culture that's just turning up the volume louder. Because people start asking real questions, and so of course then the theater needs to be heightened, and new narratives need to be created to try to create an emotional engagement, which of course is not real, because it's meant to take you on some level, even if it's just profit driven, to take you away from your very human emotion, which is, why don't we care about everybody?
The ruling class, the social engineers, are so good at controlling us and dumbing us down and having 1,000 blaring loudspeakers in the background to where we just curl up as little balls. But what the ruling elite need to understand is they're not immune from this. They're basically drinking their own poison. And this is what happens throughout history with Caligula and Nero and so many other systems where the elite go crazy. And that's what concerns me the most, is that undoubtedly the ruling power structures, the different special interests, they're in control of the world. They're in control of the propaganda, but they're not in control of themselves. And so it's almost like the monsters from their subconscious are now actually running the machine. And instead of it being Caligula marrying his horse or Nero going crazy and burning Rome and then committing suicide because he could, they're going to commit planetary suicide. They're going to kill us with all these super weapons and bioweapons if humanity collectively at an instinctive level and a spiritual level, and those two are connected, doesn't flip the survival switch and cause some type of emergency metamorphosis that takes us out of this. We're either going to move to the next level or we're going to destroy ourselves. My gut, my spirit shakes with the realization and total understanding that we are at the crossroads jump point.
I think that we're going to survive it. And I think that there's going to be a kind of, for lack of a better word, a public reckoning. Now, ideally, it's a peaceful one. where Jim Morrison from the Doors, the great lead singer of the Doors, he was very intrigued by the idea of how to manipulate a crowd, and some of the things that I brought in rock and roll I sort of took from his theories. He used to do things like, when he was just a spectator, he would go in a crowd with three of his friends, and they would plant themselves at various points in the crowd and try to turn the crowd against the band. And then obviously on stage he would do things to see where the flip point was. There's people talk about a catchphrase like a tipping point. You don't need 100% of the people to agree with something to reach a tipping point. So where are we? Let's say in a gross oversimplification, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And most people, and probably the predominant number of people listening to your program, feel that what's happening is the wrong way. We just feel in our gut that something's not right, whether it's GMOs or vaccines or fascism or Federal Reserve, doesn't matter. We just feel something's not quite right. Okay, where's that tipping point? If there's 100 million people, how many people do we need in that tipping point? And I think we're starting to get actually pretty close to that tipping point, where the public's let's call it the thoughtful minority that's not going to buy this BS propaganda. There's going to be a point where we're just going to reach that, and there's going to be a critical mass point where you're not going to be able to turn up the volume anymore. You're not going to be able to play any louder, for lack of a better way to put it, and something new is going to need to happen. It'll be in that moment, that decisive moment, where a completely new paradigm can be born, and all of us are going to have a different level of responsibility in this culture, and that's sort of what I've been talking about as I've been promoting my album, because I'm getting asked a lot of questions about how musicians can exist rightfully in the new culture, and I keep talking about self-responsibility, entrepreneurship, and at the same time, the audience needs to meet them somewhere in the middle, where they need to support an artist who's being real, as opposed to, let's say, the robot class. And we see these parallels everywhere in culture. We see it in Hollywood. We see it even in the political class, where occasionally somebody actually stands up and tries to have a good idea. And I know lately you've been talking a lot about what's going on with Ron Paul and Rand Paul, and the way people feel betrayed, and and whether this is just another shell game. And I mean, we're all kind of dealing with these different reckonings in public. And then the converse, though, that's very different is, well, how should we react? And this is the difference. We're no longer just sheep sort of sitting there with our hands over our ears. We're saying we must do something, and we have to form the new paradigms of what we can actually do.
I agree with you. I feel the responsibility that I have a platform to reach millions, that I should be doing a better job. I catch myself getting drugged back into anger, getting kind of rabbit trailed off into things that they put out, and I'm overanalyzing. And I think it's important that all of us that know the truth stop overanalyzing and know that we're trying to do the right thing. We want to make a better planet. We want our species to survive. We want to be less violent, because I found that good people, to oversimplify it, tend to overanalyze ourselves. I mean, here's an example, and you may not have known this 15, 20 years ago, but I'm sure you know it now, and I'm not just kissing your here, Mr. Corrigan. Getting to know you a little bit, listening to what you've had to say over the years, I know why the power structure that's very shrewd from day one is attacking you, because you are intelligent. You are a threat to their system. You are a maverick.